by a show of hands, has anyone used CEFPython in this room? Okay, you guys are good. So, okay, so there are, at this URL, it's just a little website I do on my spare time, it's a tutorial website. At this URL, I have walkthroughs for this. So all the things that we'll be talking about today, there are walkthroughs here, and the slides also. So there's PDF and PowerPoint right here. And let's start. Okay, so basically, CEFPython helps us embed browsers into our applications. So there are multiple reasons why you might want to do this. Okay, so Chromium is the code behind Google's Chrome browser. There's also a Chromium OS, but that's not what this is talking about. This is talking about the browser. So when you open Chrome, you are using the Chromium, like Chromium code base is being used. Okay. So what is CEF? CEF is a C wrapper around Chromium. So Google's code base is C and C++, and then Marshall Greenblatt, the guy that wrote CEF, basically made a wrapper around that to make it easier for you to embed the browser into your application. Okay, so what is CEFPython? CEFPython is a Python wrapper around CEF. So it's done using, so there's C++ and Python. Has anyone used Python in here? Okay, Python. Okay, so Python, we'll introduce what that is in a bit. It's basically a superset of Python. Imagine Python plus C data types. So if your Python's running slow and you want to make it run faster, you can compile, you can write some Python code, which is a superset of Python, indicate data types, and then it compiles down and runs a lot faster. So that's what Python is. It also can be used for interfacing, and so in this instance, it was used for interfacing CEFPython. So why would you want to embed a browser? Why would you want to embed a browser in an application and potentially use it solely as your user interface? So you could embed the browser in, and when somebody opens the application, they might not even realize they're seeing a browser, and you've done the whole user interface with HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then any other processing you need to do, you can do it in Python. So why would you want to do this? Well, if you're really familiar with web design, how many web guys do we have? A lot? Okay, so by show of hand, I'd say over half of you are familiar with web design. So this is a perfect thing. If you wanted to write an app and you don't want to learn a specific UI framework, you could totally write an app. It's a lot easier than you think. You can write an app and make it a web app, and the people that use your app will never know. They wouldn't know that it is. I mean, I guess it depends on how you did the UI. If you make it look really webby, that does help. Okay, another thing is when you design the app, let's say people resize the window and you want it to behave responsively. Responsively is the new buzzword for how many people have done responsive design. Okay, fair enough. Okay, so when you take the app and you go like this, you resize it. All the elements. If you've seen web pages that they go really well on mobile, and all the elements kind of shift on the page as maybe a different menu appears as you get beyond a certain width. And I'll show you examples of that. Let's say you want custom UI controls, like things that you're really familiar with doing in web, like combo boxes or certain list designs or whatever. Let's say you want those. You can totally do those because it's a web interface and use all the web libraries you want. jQuery underscore, Lodash, whatever. So let's say you have a customer that's running a web application that you wrote, and they want to use IE 10 or 11 or IE 8 with it, and maybe they already have Chrome installed on their machine, but for whatever reason they don't want to update their software. I work for a company that does help software, and in that community, people do not update their stuff. So we have people that, it's just like, it is so hard to get them to get off IE 8. So let's say, what we could do is we could just give the client, here's a lightweight browser that you can run. It won't affect the version of Chrome you have installed or Firefox or whatever, and we can certify that our app runs in this browser because that's what we tested with. And it's a very specific version of Chrome or Chromium. Okay, so what's something that I would like to do in my spare time with a browser UI? Have any of you heard of PhaserJS? okay, PhaserJS. So it's an MIT license, totally free to use. You could develop a game with this, a 2D game, and I have a little example of, so like let's say you want to write Breakout, right, in the browser, and they have, their documentation for this is really good. So I can click to start, and I mean, you'd be surprised how well this stuff runs. Well, you could totally take this view right here, throw it in a Chromium shell, and next thing you know, you have, and you can make a downloadable application people can run, and they don't even have to know that it's, why would they care if they're playing a game and they like it? So you can write games. That's something I'd like to do with this. Okay, so who uses CEF currently? Now CEF is the C++ layer here. So it's basically the wrapper around Chromium. I'll bet you've seen it and probably not realized. So Amazon, Amazon Music, have you ever used Amazon Music? Anyone? Yeah? So Amazon Music, have you ever noticed when you scale it, you notice how it changes? So you know, hey, you're listening to Brad Paisley, or maybe not, and then you scale it down. Notice how it scales really nicely? It's very resize friendly. So this is the Wikipedia page for CEF. It shows you all of the different people that are, all the different companies that are using this. It's extensive. You know, GitHub for Windows, Facebook Messenger for Windows, Evernote. I mean, a lot of people are using this.
AOL Instant Messenger?
AOL Instant Messenger, and still, yes. So CEFPython requirements currently, you can only, it doesn't support Python 3 yet. So, and first when I saw that, I was kind of like, oh, you know, because everything that I'm writing currently, you know, the website that I work on, everything is in Python 3. So we'll be talking about potential alternatives and what you can do in a bit. It runs on, so anything greater than Windows XP, SP3 Plus, it'll run on. I mean, anything that you can imagine Chrome running on, this will run on. So CEFPython does support Linux and Mac and OS X. Okay, so there's no Python 3 packages yet. If you look, the author has built it with Python 3.2, but I checked and there were no packages available. You can't just do a pip install. On Windows, you can just do a pip install CEFPython 3. And I have walkthroughs for that on how to install it. Okay, so there are multiple examples that come with CEFPython, different UI libraries that work with CEFPython. Anyone use Kivy?
I've played with it.
Playing with it? Okay, cool. So Kivy is pretty impressive. The one I ended up choosing, so all of these right here are free for commercial use. I mean, obviously LGPL, so there's certain restrictions on what you can do. I ended up choosing WXPython as the example that I wanted to work with. This one, PyQt, I mean, I've heard a lot of good things about it. B for commercial use, so I just skipped that for now. Okay, so I chose WXPython. It's open source. It's free for commercial use. It's cross-platform. It's based on the WXWidgets C++ library. And so that's why I chose that. So there's a really good WXPython example that comes with CEFPython. Now, if you're on Windows, and most of these examples I did on Windows, but you can kind of adapt them to other operating systems. So when you do like on Windows, you do a pip install CEFPython 3 after you install Python 2.7, and there are also some steps depending on the version of Python 2.7 you're running as far as getting pip installed, and I have that up on I have walkthroughs for that as well if you go here, because there are some gotchas when you install it. But after you have it installed, if you go to this directory, if you go to your Python 2.7, your site packages, CEFPython 3 examples directory, you go in here, there's wxpython.py. And when you run it, it looks like this. And I'll show you what that's like. So when you run it, it looks like this. So notice I can resize, and they're using WXWidgets, so they define a menu here. So notice, I mean, you can make it look kind of however you want. I mean, people don't have to know. There's no forward and back buttons. People aren't going to know necessarily as a web browser. But one thing that's nice when you're debugging the user interface, you can just right-click, and all of a sudden you've got the Chrome developer tools. So if you've ever used a UI framework and it was a huge pain to develop the UI, like, oh, this input box is like 5 pixels lower, why is it? You know, this is really handy to figure out, to diagnose things. So there are lots of options here. They tell you how to call into the Python and back from Python into JavaScript. And this is kind of, this is the most helpful thing that I've found for documentation, is just to open this example. Now, so let's proceed here. So I want to make sure we get to everything. Okay, so this is what it looks like when it comes up, and that's great. Oh, so the icon, when it comes up, if you notice, it's got a little, in your taskbar, it's got a little Python icon right here. And so what I'll show you, jump too far ahead. Okay, so does everyone who runs this, do they have to have Python installed? And the answer is no, they don't. Because at least, and there are different libraries for this, at least for Windows. If you're not doing it for Windows, I would use probably CXFreeze. But if you're on Windows, you can use Py2exe, and there are tutorials here that show you how to do that. We'll walk through how to do that. But you can create an executable out of it, and then you can just give the app to people, and people don't need to have Python installed. So that's really handy. You can use that for other Python scripts that you create. So all you do to create an exe out of it, out of the wxpython.py that we saw earlier in Windows Explorer, all you have to do is you create a distutils build script basically, and you give it the script right here, and then you run. So I usually create a batch file that sets the Python path and then just runs python.exe and then that build exe. So this Python file that we looked at, this is the build_exe.py. And then you just give it py2exe as an argument. And the next thing you know, you have a wxpython.exe that you can distribute. And I've built multiple things with py2exe, and it works really, really well. And I've used it where I work, and it works great. Okay, so when you first build an exe from this stuff, and you bring up the application, you'll notice in your taskbar you've got a little icon like this, and that kind of just bugged me because I wanted a custom icon there, and that's really easy to do as well. There's a line, and in your setup. So I'll just show you really quick. So from this page, okay. So you see this icon here, and you want to change that because it just kind of itches at you that you don't want your customers to see that when they pull your app up. So what you can do is you just add this line, icon resources, right there, and give it an icon. And I created a little custom icon right here, which was easy to do. I have a walkthrough on that as well, right here. There was a program that I bought for that. It was $50. It creates the icons in all the different sizes. You know how on Vista you need bigger ones, and so it'll create all the different sizes. You know, it takes like 5 minutes, so I thought it was worth it. But then you have a custom icon, and also the icon in the upper left-hand corner that can be changed as well, and that's in your wxpython.py. Basically in the example code that you modify, you just add this little line, and then it sets the icon up there. So that's pretty handy. Okay, so next. Okay, so when we run this, we built an exe from this, and then we run it. What does Task Manager look like? like how much memory are, how much memory are we using, and so forth. So when you run Chrome, have you ever noticed you have like, you open a bunch of tabs, you've got like 20 chrome.exes open. So there is memory usage to consider here. So like when you build an exe and you run it, and it looks like there's the screenshots we've shown previously, you'll notice there's a subprocess.exe, and this is by design. This is actually a lighter weight executable that you make, or that the WXPython, the person that did CEFPython, they built a lightweight executable, and that is called your browser subprocess path, and we'll get to that in a bit. So Chromium uses multiple processes, and it uses inter-process communication to talk between them. There are security issues that we'll talk about in a second with that, because if you have multiple processes talking to each other, you want to make sure that the one that's talking to you is who you think it is, is the process you think it is. So what processes are involved? There's the browser process, which in our case is wxpython.exe, and then there's your render processes, and there's also a plugin. There are plugin processes, like if you run Flash, you probably don't want Flash bringing down your browser if and when it crashes. And so what they do, have you ever heard of Blink? Anyone? Blink, the rendering engine? So basically all your layout, when it reads the HTML and the CSS, and it figures out where all the elements are going to go, that's done in the render process. And also parsing and executing the JavaScript, that's going to happen in the render process. And this is important to remember if you're, when you're debugging. So if you ever debug, especially to C and C++, if you ever jump into the CEF, C++ code, it's really important to know which process you're in, because otherwise you'll set a breakpoint in one of the callbacks or something, and you'll just sit there like, why isn't this being called? I know this should be called. Well, it is being called, but you might be attached to the wrong process. So you just want to make sure. You can put in order to do that, in order to stop in there, you can use a debug break. This is C++. I'm sure there's a way to do it in Python, but so far I haven't had a need to do it in the Python stuff yet. We'll get to that. So multiple processes. Okay, the browser subprocess path. This is a setting that you basically give it the path to that subprocess.exe. And so that's basically when it starts up, it knows, okay, I'm going to kick this subprocess off for my render process. If you don't supply this, it will use that wxpython.exe. It will use that for your render process. And that can be bad, because if you're doing a lot in your main process, like your main application, if that's like takes forever to start up and does stuff, if you don't specify a browser subprocess path, it will start that one up instead. Does that make sense? So undesired results, basically. So all it is a separate lightweight process that you probably won't have to worry about. You can rename it if you don't want it to show as subprocess.exe. You want it to show as xcorporation.exe or something. You can rename it, and it's not a big deal. Okay, so in the Chromium embedded framework, there are multiple message loops that go on. Like you think when you navigate to a web page, when it's doing all the user interface stuff, it's got to handle all that. Like we don't have to handle that, luckily. So you use CEFPython, you don't have to handle that kind of stuff. Like the user navigates to a web page, you send them, you do some JavaScript, a location redirect or something. You don't have to handle that. Chromium handles all that for you. But as such, you want to keep those message loops running, because if you're creating your own application, it's probably going to have its own message loop. And if you're not running the Chromium message loop, then your stuff's going to freeze up, and you're going to be like, well, why isn't this working? Why isn't this JavaScript is like really kludgy, and why isn't this working? Well, so when you run the C++ side of things, there's message loop functionality that blocks that just waits and runs the Chromium message loop, and that's actually the best way to run it. But if you're writing your own applications and embedding, which likely you are, then there's this function called do message loop work. And in the WXPython example, this is called on a timer. So it's called like every, I want to say like milliseconds or something, they call this. And so if you ever write an app and for any reason it's like not responsive or whatever, like you move the web page, you're doing stuff, and it's not responsive, it might be related to the message loop. So just so you know where to look. Okay, don't start the message loop. That's the thing. Don't start the message loop. Okay, there's this thing called the Sandbox. Remember how we were talking about security? The Sandbox is all about security. So you have these separate render processes, and you don't want them to have too much control. Like Flash, you probably don't want that. You might not want to trust that. I'm nothing against Adobe, but I mean, Flash is doing a lot of stuff. And so anyways, the render process, if you turn on the Sandbox, the render processes can only access CPU and memory. They can't access more than that. So it's a security. The Sandbox is all about security. Okay, so what I did is I was doing lots of walkthroughs. I kind of ran out of time a little bit because I wanted to do something a little more showy as an application. But I decided, well, I'll just do a simple example that shows, like, let's say I want to write an application that hits a server, and I type in like, I'll show you what it does. So here's the application. Let's say I type in, oh, California, or Arkansas, or whatever. Let's say I want to write an application that does this. Now this is actually, what happens is I type in here, and then when I hit enter, when I hit the search button, it calls into the Python code. It's not making like a JSON P call or something like that. It goes into the Python call, and then that Python call, and then inside the Python code, I'm using the requests library. Does anyone use the requests library? I use the request library to just do a post, request, send some JSON to a server and get it back. And so what I used as my server is CherryPy. Anyone use CherryPy? CherryPy is really handy, and I've had the opportunity to do multiple things with it. It's really nice. It's made to be production ready. It's multi-threaded. It's WSGI. Okay, so this is the sample CherryPy code that I wrote that basically opens a JSON file that just has all the states listed in it. So the states look like this: Alabama, blah 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 blah, all the states. So all I do in here is I start this server, and then when I call, like the URL will have get states in it, and when I call it, I just send in my search, and then it outputs JSON back. And the whole point of this is not to show you how to do something in CherryPy. The point is to show you that once you call into Python, you can do pretty much whatever you want. So if you're kind of restricted by making a JavaScript call, Ajax call, just call into Python, do your web API stuff from there. Maybe it's something more complicated, and you can just do that from Python. So I use the requests library right here to do that, and I have all this right here if you want to see how that's done. The code's up. Okay, so what about Python 3? Like when I said it only supported Python 2, I thought I saw some people kind of go, I love doing my stuff in Python 3 now, and this is not presenting. So what about Python 3? If you look on the CEFPython, it's on Google Code currently. Since Google Code is shutting down, eventually it's going to have to move. But it says Python 3.4 will be supported soon. This has been up for a while, so it's been up since, like, people have been asking for it for a while. And I know in January, there's been some commits to the repository like in January and stuff, but I wouldn't count on the Python 3 support soon. Like you can always contribute and help it speed along. I mean, it is open source, but I wouldn't count on the Python 3 support being there soon because it's been 6 months and it hasn't been updated. Okay, so which is fine. I mean, this is an open source project, so I'm sure it's a spare time thing. So right here, it said that the Python 3 stuff is dependent on this issue 121, and that's basically that it's since they use Python, they have to update Python in order for it to work with the newer versions of Python, like Python 3.4 or whatever, you have to update CEFPython. And so in order to update CEFPython, issue 110 needs to be resolved, which is another issue. Okay, so here's somebody asking for an update fairly recently, 4 days ago, and so it's been since January. So, okay, so what is CEFPython? CEFPython is basically Python plus C data types. So it's a superset of Python. Think about it as optimization and interfacing with C++. So you need to do stuff faster, basically. You want to compile it down to C. So so one thing that you might also notice with CEFPython, it uses an old version of the Chromium embedded framework. It uses version 1650, and right now we're on version like 23 something, like the nightlies. You can get nightly builds of CEF from Adobe. And so the nightly builds are way ahead, and I've actually found a select box bug that basically, I can show you what it looks like actually, because we're running this. So, and this is something that's not like, it's not readily, like you wouldn't know this like from looking at it. Until you ran the example and maybe put a select box on the page, you probably wouldn't notice. So, okay, so if I run this is the WXPython example again. If I hit debug on that and I run it, it doesn't have, oh no, it does have a select box. So see this select box right here? I open it, and then I drag, and it's still there. Okay, so I documented this on, I wrote a little thing up just kind of warning you like, okay, but this is fixed in future versions of Chromium Embedded Framework. So if the Chromium Embedded Framework was updated, then it wouldn't have this problem, right? Because this is not a CEFPython problem. This is like below that. So I'm going to close that just so I don't have that hanging over. Okay. Okay, so what if I want the latest version of Chromium Embedded Framework? And there's probably good reasons why you want that. So as I said, the latest nightly build that I saw was 2378, and the one that's currently in there is 1650. The newer versions, however, require Visual Studio 2013. Does anyone know why that would be a problem? So not the .NET, good guess. Any other guesses? So the reason that's a problem. True. I mean, you can do this with Linux. I focused on Windows because I kind of had to choose one. I don't have Mac, so I run Linux all the time. Okay, so Python extensions. You can write a C++ extension that goes with Python. If you look in the Python extensions documentation, it says you should use the same version of Visual C++ that was used to build Python. And so if you look, Python 2.7.9, I don't know which version they built it with. This is just this is a chart that I saw on some site. So like Python 3.4 is built with Visual Studio, what is that? That's 2010, and then this is 2008, I think. So there's a problem because the 2013 compiler is different. So that would cause issues. So yeah, Visual C++ for Visual Studio 2013 is on version 18. So the question is, can we get Python that's built with, or do we have to build it ourselves? You can build it yourself. Are there Python binaries that are built with Visual Studio 2013? And the answer is yes. I found a site where they detail out what they did, how they did it, and they provide binaries. It's for Python 3.3.4. So if I want to use Python 3 and I want to use the CEF nightly build, how would I do that? Well, if you do it with CEFPython, like if you were to contribute to that, it's quite a process because I looked into it because I was like, I wonder how hard this would be. And there's a lot of Python code there. The author's done a great job. Like they have examples, that work across and code that works, across OSs and stuff, and high DPI support and stuff like that. That's unique. But if you wanted to use Python 3 and CEF, and you didn't want to use CEFPython because upgrading it was difficult, because you have to upgrade Python and there's all those other issues, then you can write your own extension. And I started doing this, and it's actually not that hard. You can bind Python to C++ really easily. Has anyone ever heard of Swig? Use Swig? The Simplified Wrapper Interface Generator. What it does is basically you write, let's see how am I doing on time? Oh, okay, I want to finish up kind of soon. Okay, so all these languages, if you write a Swig wrapper, which it's really not that hard, and I'll show you how, you can go to like all of these languages. You can interface with many languages. There's extra work involved, but Swig is written to interface these. WX widgets for how I said the WXPython, the UI framework is based on the C++ WX widgets. WX widgets, the WXPython is done with Swig. That's how they wrote it. So installing Swig is really easy. You just download a zip file, you extract it, you add that to your path. I downloaded Visual Studio Community 2013 because it's free to use, at least if you fall under their certain criteria. And then, so with Swig, you write an interface file that looks like this. It's a .i, and basically you just include like the header, like your header file. You basically just include your header file code in here, and then do an include on the header file. And that's your interface. And this right here, you basically, this lets Swig know what you want to expose. And then what Swig does is Swig writes C++ code that you then use and build in with your other C++ code. So your C++ side, your Swig writes a little C++ wrapper. You build that with your C++ code, and it builds a .pyd, which is essentially it's a DLL. You build a .pyd file, and then from Python you can import it. So I'll show you. So you build this interface file right here, and then when you run this command Swig, you say, okay, I'm writing C++. I'm going to interface it with Python, and here's my interface file. It generates two files. It generates a Python file, so you can do import CEF Swig. That's what I called it. And then it generates the C++ wrapper code that we use to build our DLL. So if you download the CEF C++ solution, there are multiple projects in here. The CEF client is the main one, at least that I care about. This is their example that includes everything. If you run the CEF simple one, that example doesn't come with the debug tools, like the Chrome debug tools. So like if you open that example because it's simpler and you right click, you won't get the Chromium or the Chrome debug tools. But this right here, basically see this wrapper file right here? You just include this into this project. So I took the CEF nightly build from Adobe and I just modified it. I wrote a little C++ file that runs some C++ code that opens the Chromium browser. And then I wrote a header file here, and I included the wrapper. And then when you build it, you just, so you build a DLL. I changed it from executable because it was building an executable. Changed it to a DLL, and the _D is for debug. You have to have that there if you're doing debug. If you're not, then you don't. But then you just tell it to build a .pyd instead of a DLL, because that's just the way Python does it. So you just make sure you also reference when you install Python 3.3, that custom one that was built with Visual Studio 2013. You specify your include with your libs directories, and then when you build it, then you can when you call into it. And I've got the code online, but the code that I wrote basically just brings up the browser. So all the other stuff, talking from JavaScript and stuff, you'd have to write those bindings. But this just kind of gives you an idea of what Swig can do. It's really does a lot of stuff. So I think that's it. Are there any questions? Okay.
So a lot of that last stuff was very Microsoft specific.
Yes. Yeah.
If you're not in Windows,
right?
It looks like you could pretty easily go to Python 3 because it's stuck at the Visual Studio's build. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is a really good question. That might be true. I don't know on that. I mean, I haven't looked into that, but you're probably right. Because I think it's built. I think they build. I want to say they build Python with. Does anyone know what they build it with? I want to say
GCC, I think.
Yeah. So you're probably right. It would probably be easier. It'd probably be easier with that. That's a good point. Any other questions? One more? Yeah.
Kind of a follow-up to that. To step back to the motivation for this. I mean, why would I do this instead of just building a website? It looks
Right.
like is it a solution for client-side code, like somebody who wants to be able to install it locally?
Yes, so one use case that I think of is maybe I want someone to run my game and I don't want them running it in whatever browser they choose. Maybe I want them to download the app. Maybe I want it to run like this. I don't want it to have that web pagey feel. You know how like it's huge. They expand their browser out and it's like a little game's
right.
like this big. Maybe it's a look and feel thing. Maybe it's that Sally Jane, the receptionist, needs to access certain data from her machine, and I don't want her to have to log into a website or any of that stuff. I can just install an application on a machine, and I can have all the credentials and everything there in like a config file or something, and then it could automatically log her in. It could do, and there are other applications why you might want to do this. You could use it for web scraping potentially. I know there's like Casper.js and Phantom and stuff, and those are really great. This could probably also be used for web scraping if you wanted to. It's basically when you want an app instead of a web page. Like at least the work that I do, in the healthcare software space, the people that we do business with, they don't upgrade their browsers, and the reason they don't is because if we upgraded our browsers, we would have to retest all of our applications, and that's way too much for us. Well, this right here, we could provide them a browser. We could provide them, a custom browser that wouldn't affect their installed version of Chrome or Firefox or IE, and they could run our application in shell, and we could give them a better guarantee that our stuff would work, because right now we test on IE 9, 10, 11, pretty soon it's going to be Spartan or whatever. We test on Chrome, Firefox. You see what I mean? So for testing, so there are various reasons that I can think of. Not all of them. I mean, if it's better to do a web app, do a web app. But if you want it to have that kind of application feel, and you want things, maybe you want to write an application that accesses the file system in a way that browsers can't do. Maybe you want to overcome like a CORS, the cross-origin request, that kind of limitation. Because in browsers, if you open up a file that's not running at localhost and contacting localhost, it's going to restrict you unless you're using JSON-P or something. It'll block that. So that's kind of what I was thinking. If you're familiar with web and you want that, you want an application, you don't want a web application, basically. So, like, because the software that we write, we have a web version and we have here's the application that you download version of our stuff. And right now we're trying to consolidate. We're trying to share code between the two. So that's why we embed a browser, because our clients don't want to open up a browser and do it. They want their application. But that's a good question. And I thought about that multiple times. When would you use this and when would you not? That's good. Any other questions?
So now when you talk about Swig, in terms of building the CEFPython, or the Chrome Embedded Framework applications using CEFPython, you don't need Swig. Is the Swig?
No, so CEFPython is totally separate from Swig. The only reason I brought up Swig is because I kind of see Swig as if you wanted to roll your own C++ Python, if you wanted to roll your own custom stuff, use Python 3, use the latest version of Chrome Embedded Framework, and you looked at the CEFPython stuff and it was too complicated to contribute or for whatever reason, then Swig, I was just showing that as an alternative. And I kind of wanted to show how Swig works, because if your Python code isn't running fast enough and you want to speed it up, that is one way you can do it, is by writing the C++ code and then calling into it, run a lot faster. But yeah, CEFPython, Swig, totally separate things.
So you could use, like you were showing, you could use Swig to do, a PHP to interface with the Chrome Embedded Framework.
Yes, there actually already are bindings for that, and I believe it's the same author that does, and that's another thing, the author's probably stretched because they've written them for Go and for PHP bindings for Chrome Embedded Framework. So those already exist. So, any other questions?